Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Questioning Behavior. My name is Merle and as always, I'm here with my much better half, Sarah Bowen. Hey Sarah.
Hi.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying.
So today, again, as the title probably gives away, because, that's how titles work, we are going to be talking to a really close friend of mine who I genuinely think Sarah and I could have been had we not decided to do PhDs.
Well, yes. I mean, who we hope we would have been, potentially, is a better description. Yeah.
Yes. So for us, this is the parallel universe type of the good outcome if we had decided to become practitioners. So the friend I'm talking about is Etinosa. I've always been a massive fan of her work, and I'm sure, I like her as a person, helps as well. And we are just gonna have a nice sit-down, chill chat and talk about, what her perceptions are of behavioral as science, behavioral economics, as, a young behavioral scientist, how she likes practicing, how she thinks her education prepared her for, being a practitioner within behavioral economics. And, yeah. All right. So, Etinosa, first of all, welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you on. You are a very dear friend of mine, but for most listeners, they might not actually know you. So I'm sorry, but just as everyone else, you're just going to have to introduce yourself. So please tell the crowd, who are you, what do you do, and how did you get into behavioral science?
Okay. First of all, thank you guys for having me. Lovely to be here. To answer all three questions in that order, my name is Etinosa Agbonlahor. I am a behavioral economist specializing primarily in kind of the financial side of things, so helping people make better financial decisions using the insights that we have from the different kind of subdomains of behavioral science. How did I get into behavioral economics? Was that the next question?
Yep.
Okay. Wow, it's a long one, but I think the bullet points it. I got into behavioral science because I had a background in psychology and I'm really into personal finance. So I love everything to do with optimizing savings and spending and investing, and I've always kind of been that way. And so as soon as I graduated from college, from university, I had gone straight to working in the publishing industry as an editor. So I was working on kind of a range of fiction and nonfiction books, but I also kind of knew that I wanted to go to grad school at some point and either get like an MBA or a PhD, something kind of to do with finance, economics. I was just really kind of enchanted by that world, like the fiction of economics and how things worked on a macro level. And so I was kind of talking to a mentor at the time around what are my options? Should I do an MBA? Should I stay in publishing? Just kind of trying to figure life out with this person. And they recommended I read Predictably Rational, Dan Ariely's book. And I read it and I loved it. And I was like, this is amazing. I want to find out more about this. And so I just started talking to every behavioral economist that I could find. So people at IDS 42 all the way to people who were working in or studying in the UK, just talk to as many different behavioral economists as I could find, just to kind of get more insight into what is this field, is it viable, is it what I think it is, and what does it look like to practice it in the real world. And that kind of gave me the confidence to apply to Warwick University, which is where Merle and I met. Applied to Warwick, got into Warwick, quit my job, moved to work, did the degree there, and then got a job working for a bank in Australia as a behavioral economist. So that's a long way to say kind of how I fell into BE. And I've spent the last kind of 3.5 years working for a retail bank in Australia, doing a lot of kind of helping people optimize their savings, control and, spend more consciously, and then also doing a lot of work kind of on lending products. And I've recently now made a transition to working for an investment bank in New York or in the US, where I'll be doing something similar. So yeah, that answers the question.
It really does.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm kind of interested. You said something. You said the fiction of economics. Did I hear that right? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think we all kind of acknowledge economics to some degree, we create these models where we expect that people behave in rational ways. So like the foil that we use in BE, right? We say neoclassical economics says that everyone is kind of like rational, or we're going to make kind of like the optimal decision every time. We're going to, make choices that are in our best self-interest. We're going to kind of go for the most optimal thing in every situation. And we use that perspective to then determine or build out macro policies, saying if everyone is acting their own self-interest, this is the kind of model we should be building for them. This is the kind of like financial tools we should build in, right? We expect that everyone is rational and we read their product disclosure statements, so we can sell them very complex insurance because we expect that they're going to read their PDSs. Nobody does that. And that's how people fall into bad, or kind of uncomfortable financial positions. So I think the fiction of economics in the sense that we expect that people are going to behave in a better way than they actually do, and we create policies and products based on that.
Yeah, interesting. I really like that. I've not heard it before, but it makes complete sense, and especially with your publishing background, I thought there was a nice bit of overlap. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask whether or not you think the reality of being a behavioral economist, how much is that close to what you expected it to be, when you're first getting into the field? Are there any things about actually living and working as a behavioral economist that surprised you or continue to surprise you?
I think that when I came into the field, I was really taken by papers like I hope I'm getting this right, but I want to say like Dean Carlin and a couple of other people had done some work with like farmers in Kenya, helping them to optimize the use of fertilizers to grow like crops. And then Ideas for the Two was doing some other interesting work on like poverty with a bank in like Chile, like kind of like experiments that were like at the cutting edge of like actually changing lives directly. And when you read those sorts of papers, you think, wow, like behavioral economics is all about like we're changing the world by doing these tiny little things. And then coming into the field, you realize like actually a lot of BEs like making tiny little fixes that they might not radically change the world, but they make things a little bit better. So I feel like probably the difference between my perspective coming in was like, oh my God, I'm gonna like, solve poverty.
That's a big one.
And now I'm like, like if we could get people to save, like an extra $10 per month, or pay down an extra $10 on their credit cards, multiplied by 16 million people, that's good enough, right? So I think there's probably a more realistic understanding of like the impact that we're making and also the longevity of that impact.
Mm. So do you feel that behavioral science or behavioral economics, if you will, was oversold to you, or is it a bit over-marketing itself?
I think that one is tricky because behavioral economics, a lot of the experiments tend to have very like large effect sizes in small populations.
Yeah.
But then when you try to scale it, lots of noise, contamination, things come into play, and it doesn't scale as cleanly or with as large as an effect size as you would expect. So I don't think that it was oversold to the extent that you're talking about. We tried this cool new thing with 10,000, 20,000 people for a short period of time, and it worked well. We might be overselling it when we start talking about we tried this thing for 3 billion people, and we wanted it to last forever, but we saw that the effects started to attenuate 3 years into the thing. But part of it is, and all of that is just to say, it's all iteration. I do think we tend to be very bullish about BE, where we should be taking a more kind of conservative stance and saying we're learning as we're going, right? The first experiment worked in this way. We need to bring more people in, more experts, bring in certain human-centered designers, bring in UXers, other perspectives to understand how do we keep iterating and making this better and better and better. So no, I don't think BE is being oversold, but I do think that there could be a more conservative and more measured way when we're talking about some of our results.
All right, that seems fair. Is that the approach that you're seeing within the work that you've done yourself within the realm of personal finance, or are they still being a bit bullish?
I think that it kind of depends on the effects that you're talking about, right? first of all, it's just very hard sometimes to get people to even like want to run a BE experiment. And so once you cross that mountain, it's like, oh, we get to experiment on something. And then when you do run the experiment, like depends on the number of people you're talking about, right? Like a 1% effect for like 1 million people is a lot of money for your organization, right? So I think it's all nuance. It really does depend. I don't think it's strictly one way or another way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm also interested in the sort of the actual day-to-day sort of work or the projects that you've been involved with, you know, with your work, working with a bank in Sydney, and now I guess, you know, some experience you've now had in the States. How would you describe what you do to someone like me who has never worked a day in their life or worked within the field of personal finance and behavioral science? How would you describe it?
I tend to describe it as like helping people to make better financial decisions, one, but also helping the companies I work with create better financial tools, products, and, you know, processes or systems, right? And it's twofold in the sense that, yes, we want to help people, you know, if, you know, reach their savings goals, for example, but also we realize that we, as an organization, play a large role in the choice architecture, in the UX, in the products themselves that help people get to their savings goals, right? So it's two-pronged. So I guess like to describe what I do on a day-to-day basis is I'm basically just kind of working with really amazing teams in different organizations, getting them to create really cool products, processes, systems that, you know, help people very easily get to better financial outcomes.
Yeah. Nice. That sounds, yeah, I think you've sold it to me. I could be interested in a career in this field.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Are you recruiting? So the role of user design and in sort of environments, are we talking about sort of virtual like banking environments or more physical environments? Or where have you sort of had the most experience with sort of being a little choice architect?
I think that it's a decision environment, right? And that could be anything. It could be somebody who's walking into a bank branch. It could be somebody who's calling up a call center at your company. It could be somebody who's logging into your app to do something, right? So I think environment is a decision environment, and it can take whatever form where the person is trying to make a decision or get something done.
Right. So, I mean, are there any good examples you could think of where there was a really powerful change in the environment that actually, you know, was kind of really simple and seems intuitive, but was just not the norm, not the default before you came in?
So some interesting things that I've seen organizations do is, for example, and I think this kind of goes back to one of the core principles of behavioral economics, which is if you want somebody to do something, just make it easy for them to do it, right? So, for example, Digit in the US a couple of years ago was experimenting with getting people to save more. And they tapped into this idea of two things, right? First of all, pre-commitment devices and framing, right? So, for example, when people receive their tax refunds, they tend to think about them slightly separately to like standard income. So like your paycheck is your paycheck, but when you get a tax refund, it feels like a different type of income, right? It feels like a windfall. We call them like windfalls. And so the way you spend or the way you think about that windfall might be slightly different to how you think about spending your regular paycheck. And so they wanted to see if they could get people to pre-commit using a portion of their tax refunds or saving a portion of their tax refunds, if they could get people to really commit to doing that. And part of the idea behind, like, you know, getting them to pre-commit is just, it's easier for us to make kind of harder decisions for our future selves, right? Yeah. Compared to our present selves, because we think our future selves will be better people than we are today. So
far, not so good.
Every like behavioral economist is standing up in their chairs right now, shaking their fists and being like, that is not what the literature says. Like, you could have termed that better. Basic, in plain English, that's what it means. So essentially, like, Digit got people to pre-commit a portion of their tax refunds before they got the refund. So they said, you know, what percentage of your tax refund do you want to save ahead of getting the refund? And so people plugged in, like, you know, a percentage or a number. And then when the tax refund came, they automated that process. So they automatically said, you know, hey, looks like you've gotten your refund in. We're going to move the 5% you said you wanted to save over into your digit account. And for me, that's like it's really cool. It's a very, very like kind of, it's one of the classic experiments I refer to when I talk about kind of the role of behavioral economics in personal finance, because in that instance, all the customer or all their client had to do was make a simple decision around how much do I want to save later in the future. It's not even right now. I'm not feeling the pain of paying or saving right now. It's going to be much later. And so being able to make a decision about your future self, slightly easier. And then they're also automating that withdrawal. So they're removing the effort from it. So I think that BE comes with really clever and really like very cool like interventions like that, where it's using our understanding that, hey, it's going to be easier for you to make a decision about yourself in the future than right now. So let's get you to make a decision about the future. Hey, you might not feel when the future becomes the present, you might no longer want to stick to the decision you made before. So let's automate it for you. Let's not have you don't need to do anything. We're just going to get it done for you. So cool little twerks, cool little like tweaks like that are kind of where I've been able to design and also like things like that, but also have seen like BE can have kind of big influence in personal finance.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that one of your favorite projects of the past couple of years, would you say? Is that one of your favorite applications? Or does something else even spring to mind where you're like, yeah, that was just a really, really good approach of behavioral science and personal finance?
I think that's going to be one of like my favorite applications. Obviously, I didn't work on that. But whenever I think about how do you do this in a clever way, I think of things like that, like just very clear principles applied in a very kind of transparent manner. But there's also been lots of stuff in like, the mental accounting literature, for example, just the idea that like what you label your money could influence how likely you are to spend it. Because in neoclassical economics, money is fungible, right? So a dollar is a dollar. But we see like if somebody labels $100 emergency funds and $100 fund spending, they're not going to use their emergency funds for fun stuff, because in their minds, they've created a mental account that stops them from using those funds for something different, right? So even like we've been able to do stuff that leverages that idea of mental accounting in building like, new products, new ways of working. But yeah, I think just kind of cool concepts like that. Yeah.
I think both of those are really cool examples of like really intuitive behavioral science. Like you hear that example and you're just like, that makes total sense. And also particularly the first one, the way that there's so many overlapping concepts coming together, like in a really nice way. And I think you said something interesting as well, that it's a transparent intervention. Like is that something that you have to sort of make a conscious decision about, basically how much to tell people about why there's been this change to their decision environment? Like, is that something you can be upfront about from within sort of personal finance, that, if you do this, we think that it will help you in the long run, or we've made this change to your environment because, we think it will help you save more tomorrow?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that it's important to always be as transparent as possible. Well, then the question becomes, how effective is the nudge if you're going to tell everyone, hey, we're doing this because we think that you're going to do X, Y, Z, or it's going to help you be better. I think that transparency kind of comes in a range of like forms. You can make that sound better. But transparency, there's different ways of being transparent, right? Transparency could be kind of what we talk about in this idea of libertarian paternalism, which is we're not going to remove the choice away from you, right? But we're going to design it in a way that you're more likely to do what's going to benefit you, right? In some ways, that's a form of not overt transparency, but still saying like, here's what's in front of you, and here's the choice like we think you're more likely to make. But I don't know if I've ever seen any instances where people have come out and said, in the middle of the experiment, this is what it's supposed to be doing. I think what we tend to do or what I recommend is more kind of disclosure or publishing your results or talking about them at the end of the experiment, and making that available to everyone and saying, we wanted to see if designing the savings feature in this way would work better than designing it in the other way. And we found that this way worked more, so we're going with this way. And you make that public and you help everyone understand what the rationale was, and you're able to define the actions and decisions you took. That's a form of transparency as well. So,
yeah, no, it's an interesting one, because I think, you know, from an experimentalist point of view, you don't want to give away what the intervention is. You don't want to give away what the intentions of the experimenter are. It's well documented that people will behave differently if they think they're being watched or observed, or that the observer has some sort of intentions or expectations. I mean, I think it's an interesting one, personal finance, particularly because it's a real opportunity for every individual to be their own little behavioral scientist. Like the tools and tricks and tips we use to manage our own money, as sort of a DIY approach to behavioral science. Do you see that as an approach to apply behavioral science a lot, to trying to give people the tools to, you know, implement their own sort of interventions? Like if they know they have a self-control problem, here's some tools that they can use, or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that definitely being able to give people the tools to help kind of build their own, because the thing about personal finances is that there's no one size kind of fits all. In aggregate, we can say this experiment worked to improve savings across, 4 million people in this manner, but there's going to be so many different heterogeneous effects because it's so personal to every single person. So I think that being able to give people the tools, for example, here's how you can set limits on your debit card so you don't spend over a certain amount. Or, for example, you can choose, I know there's really cool apps where you can control your spend based on location. So geolocation, if you step into this store and, the app knows the longitude and latitude, it's not going to let you spend more than $100, for example.
Wow.
So there's ways for you to create cool little rules around spending for people. I think kind of the foundational question of that first is do people have the desire to want to put in those self-control tools, first of all, and second of all, how easy is it for them to implement? And third, do the effects attenuate, right? Like, do they eventually die out? Does it become a matter of, I step into the store, I know I can't spend more than $100, but if I press this button here, it unlocks all of the money, right? So, but I do think in general, people have a desire to control their finances and have a desire to feel on top of how they're managing their money. The question is, to what extent do they want a big organization to do that for them? Mm-hmm. And to what extent do they want to be the ones who are firmly in control of every aspect of that process of managing their money?
I think it's a very good point. I've had a couple of conversations with people who were designing apps like this that did actually apply a geo-locating or a geo-hacking, as it's colloquially actually known, which I find it very, very interesting. But, I have to say, and this is very much on the how much data do you want anyone else to have about you? I don't think I want my personal finance app to know that, I'm standing in front of, I don't know, a jeweler's. Or maybe I'm standing in front of Chanel, and I know I shouldn't be there. First of all, Chanel is not really my style. Second of all, I can't really afford it. But, I don't think I need my phone to then send me angry text messages being like, don't. Just stop, please. I mean, there's a variety of ways that you can go about it. I've heard some great suggestions where some people, because the pain of paying is obviously a very famous concept, where some people take that a bit too literal, where they're like, well, because most people now pay through their phone. At least I know this is becoming very popular in Western Europe. I know it's very popular in Australia as well. Mm-hmm. That you could literally, if you pay through your phone, that the phone just sends you a shock. Literally, you're electrocuting yourself.
It's not that deep, you guys. Oh, it
doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Point one. Point two, I think most people have, mentioned this jokingly, but everything that gets turned into a joke, like we know meme culture, eventually it will exist.
I will be looking out for that next April Fool's new product announcement, electroshock therapy. Although it could have some unintended consequences where people start to enjoy the shocks because it's associated with spending money. I don't know, but interesting. So putting pain of paying back in to electronic methods. I mean, there's something in there for sure. I mean, you take out the torture. There is something to that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. My cousin and my partner and I were getting dinner like a couple of weeks ago in Sydney, and we were joking that like you can't leave your house in Sydney without spending money. In fact, breathing oxygen, somebody's probably paying for oxygen somewhere in that city. It's just such a part of life. Like you leave your house and you're like, I'm gonna get a coffee. Bam, you've spent some money, and you didn't like. It's just an automatic process, right? So I feel like with the whole pain of pain, I wonder if like part of it is, or the flip side of it is people just looking for, well, how do I put self-control back into how I spend, right? Because like it's so easy to spend, and cliche, but like it is so easy to spend money these days. And with COVID and lockdown, like that's all anyone can do is like press buttons on the internet to get stuff delivered to them. So I think part of it is less like, at the point of pain, like give me a little bit of pain, and it's more like even before I get to that point of pain, like how do I put in control mechanisms so I never have to like be in front of Chanel trying to make a decision about whether to go in or not? Like help me avoid that entirely, or help me have a budget so that when I step into Chanel, I'm like, I have my Chanel money, take all my money and give me a bag, right? Like how do I make more of a decision so that I'm not having to make that big weighted decision in the heat of the moment?
Yeah.
The aim in life is to have a mental account just called Chanel. So you've mentioned earlier that you've worked on lending products. Now, I have to admit, I don't actually know very much about what's going on in that sector. So what exactly, what is going on with lending products? Because you've mentioned yourself, you like to optimize your spending, optimize your saving. That is a large part of your interest. But then I find working with lending products quite counterintuitive. Maybe I'm just too anti-lending products.
I think like it depends. So I know, because you and I have talked about like the cultural differences in lending and approaches to like how people use lending, right? So probably like where you're from, like you don't really need lending products to help you like, establish or do anything. Like you can, live a whole entire life and never once need a credit card. Whereas in the US and to some extent in Australia, like a credit card helps you. A credit card, a mortgage, this sorts of like lending products can help you build a history of good use of credit, which then unlocks more avenues for you to do things like invest and buy a house down the line. So I think that responsible use of credit is important, actually. And I feel like it's just part of like being an adult. It's like saying to people, well, knives can cut people's hands, so we just advocate never using knives. Just no knives. Don't do it. Strip your food with your hand, right? It's much safer for you. And it's like, well, no, you're an adult human being. At some point, you need to use a knife because it helps you get the outcomes you want in terms of the kind of foods you want to eat. Same thing with a credit card and a lending product. Like, you're an adult, learn how to use it responsibly so you can get to the outcomes you want down the line. So that's like from a kind of a philosophical perspective, my view on lending products. But in terms of what's happening in the market now, I actually feel that there's and this is like, at least for the Australian market, I think that it has been kind of a slow shift away from the traditional lending products among millennials specifically. There's more kind of debt aversion. So people going, kind of like you, Merle, going, not sure I want a credit card. I've seen other people get ruined by taking out, heavy amounts of credit that they didn't know how to use responsibly. And now, they're kind of up the creek without a paddle, right? So no thank you to the credit cards. What else can we use? So more people using things like, buy now, pay later facilities like Afterpay, things like that. So in the Australian market, at least, I think that there's kind of lending products are having to like revolutionize themselves and rethink what does it mean to be a lending product? What even is the use of credit? And can we meet the needs or the credit needs of our customers, of our clientele, of the average Australian millennial without having, can we meet those needs by innovating on our current product set, right? And I think all kind of financial institutions in Australia are probably like going through this process to some extent. I think that in the US is probably similar, but I'm not sure to that extent. It's different because, again, you do need some of these products in order to build a good credit history. So Americans probably have less flexibility around whether they use a credit card or not compared to like Australians.
Okay. Yeah, no, like you said, we have discussed the cultural aspect of this type of stuff before. So in the Netherlands, where I'm from, I wouldn't be, I know for a fact that tourists who have come to Amsterdam, for example, obviously friends of mine, were surprised that a lot of stores just do not accept credit cards. Like you can wave your Amex about all you want, that's not gonna get you anything anywhere. No, we're a debit card society, and
so only debit cards is what they accept.
Yeah, majority, yes.
Wow.
That is how we're raised, and we're quite debt averse, which also comes from the idea that spending beyond your means is just a really odd flex. And the Dutch culture isn't a flexing culture. Conspicuous consumption is I wouldn't want to say frowned upon, because that means that like no one ever in the history of the Netherlands has flexed, which they most definitely have. But it's just a bit it's just a kind of a bit whatever. But this is just you know, an ingrained Dutch attitude, but which is also fading out, by the way. I think consumerism eats away at everything. But it's interesting that you've mentioned Afterpay, or here in Europe, I think Klarna might be the more popular version of that. How do you feel about that from a consumer finance perspective?
I think it depends on the kind of protections that are built into the product, right? So are there, for example, reasonable late fees, and when do late fees get charged? What is the interest rate, if there is an interest rate? I think that the product in itself, I can see the appeal of products like that, in the sense of, I know what my total monthly bill is going to be, or I know that I'm spending $100 and I'm only going to have to pay $25, and then another $25, another $25, and another $25. So in terms of like a product that is actually intuitive and easy to understand, I can see the appeal of products like that. I think that where it becomes important to watch out for are kind of the pitfalls, right? Like the things that get hidden in the T's and C's, you know, like, is there a $30 late fee even though you're only over by $5? You know, just tiny things like that are what people need to watch out for. And a product that is behaviorally designed would either not have those sorts of like inherently complex features, or if it does have those inherently complex features, it'd be very transparent upfront when you're applying for the product and say, hey, if in the past you've had trouble paying your credit card on time, this is not the product for you because we have late fees, you know. So helping people make the right decisions about whether that's the right product for them to start with. And then helping people understand what a responsible use of the product is, and also putting in protections in the life of the product. Like, hey, we see you've been late 3 times. Are you sure you still want this card? Maybe you want a different card. Things like that. All kind of, maybe you should get a debit card. All of those things probably influence the how good a product is, whether it's a buy now pay later product or a standard credit card.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense to me. My main question from the Afterpay, Klarna, whichever one, it really doesn't matter. What I find really interesting, you've already mentioned mental accounting. Right. The thing is, people are quite shit at mental accounting, and that's just because it is, especially if you know you're dealing, you've shopped at, I don't know, we'll just pick H&M, and now you have 4 payments of $25, or pick a different currency, but if you have quite a few things on Afterpay, so this is the H&M order split by 4, and then you might have ordered something somewhere else, and then suddenly you're trying to juggle multiple late payments which are scattered throughout the month, plus your additional bills which are just on the normal routine, hopefully. People just can't do this. That is my main concern with these types of payment forms, where there is the general idea that you will have this type of money later, at least we hope. But they've done demographic research, and quite a lot of people that, you know, use Afterpay are using Afterpay because they work in the gig economy, and this is a form of consumption for them, which is also how the credit card got introduced. So that makes a lot of sense. But if you don't have a stable income and you're not accurately really keeping track of what's going in and what's going out, I feel like this is just as messy as anything else. Like, I'm not super convinced by that from this perspective.
Yeah, I also wonder if like the issue is how integrated are buy now pay later products with like your main financial institution, right? Do you have to log into a different app to see what you spent on like your Klarna, or is it like you can log into like I don't know your Deutsche Bank app and see everything? So it goes back to the idea of like cognitive ease, right? How easy is it for people to keep track of these things?
Yeah, full integration would help. That's true. That is definitely true.
100%. And it's interesting, like when you're talking about, you know, the tools, the products themselves, they're not good or evil. It's how you use it, and giving examples of how you could design a product that is going to be more responsible. I mean, doesn't, you know, all of this come down to the assumption that the consumer and the producer of the product's interests are aligned, in a sense that the actual producer of that product, they care about the well-being of the consumer. I mean, what do you think about that? Is it something that you see a lot, that most of the time these interests are aligned, or the other way?
I think that it depends on how long a business expects to be a business for, because sustainable customers, financially healthy customers, are customers who will keep your business profitable, right? So if the goal is to kind of like, in the short term, screw over as many people as possible with complex products that you know at some point they will, you know, end up paying more for the product than they should be, you're not going to have customers for very long. After a while, they're going to go, maybe I don't want this. Maybe I want something better, right? So, so I think that interests should be aligned if the businesses have a long-term focus. But in instances where the interests aren't aligned, I think it can sometimes be easy to pick up on that. You know, like if you're doing your research when you're looking for a new credit card and you see like, oh, it's got really high annual fees, or it's got really like, you know, stringent like late fees, whatever it is. I think it can sometimes be easy to pick up on, actually, this is not a business that's trying to do the right thing for me. But then also, like, realistically, what's happening now is that people are flocking to businesses that are putting the financial well-being of their customers ahead, and making that a priority. And it's easy to see that they are, because everything is transparent. Everything is simple. They don't have, you know, products that are very difficult to explain or very difficult to use. So I think, long and short, to answer that question, first of all, businesses that want to be sustainable across the long term will put the financial well-being of their customers ahead of the game. And two, businesses that are thriving right now, especially among the younger generation, are businesses that are putting the financial well-being of customers ahead of everything else, or as important as everything else.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
But then I'm quite curious. So from your perspective, have you seen any type of project or tool or anything recently where for you it's very clear that that business is specifically aiming at the improvement of financial well-being?
I'm not going to cheat and say CBA, even though that's my first answer. But Monzo in the UK is doing some really interesting things, and has been at the forefront in some ways of keeping customers informed, you know, giving them notifications for transactions, helping them like create limits on their spend, making it easy to reach somebody when you have a problem, right? So I will say like Monzo in the UK is doing very, very cool things, and I've always held that kind of that neobank, if you will, in high esteem. So probably Monzo, people like, you know, CBA, Lemonade which is Dana Reilly's company based in New York, like they're doing some interesting things in the insurance market. I don't know how profitable they are, but they are doing some interesting things. I don't know if they're making any money. Yeah, there are a couple of really cool banks out there doing interesting things.
All right, good to know. So then I have to give this some context, because otherwise it's going to sound like a very random question. But I've been doing some research lately in the area of decentralized finance, because it's like every other week something will pop out of the crypto regime. I think this week, which is going to date the episode, I'm so sorry. I think Dogecoin was hyping because obviously it was at 420. There we go. The meme takes over again. We've seen a rise in NFT trading, which is not really surprising, although NFT is technically speaking not new on a technological level. It just got rehyped. And you've mentioned yourself that you're quite fond of this neobank, which a neobank is not exactly what you call decentralized finance, but it's a good comparator for the system that we currently have in place. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, where do you think the financial system's going?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Where is the financial system going? I think that it's actually quite hard to predict where things are going. But maybe I can tell you where the things that I feel like are going to be successful in the financial world. It's going to be more simplicity. So simpler products are easier to understand. It's going to be more kind of it's going to be kind of more transparency. So I think like the principles of like simpler products that are more transparent, products that also kind of like tap into personalization is going to be big. So right now, this is what we're talking about at the start of the conversation. Lots of behavioral economics is, at a macro level, we helped 4 million people save a ton of money. But lots of heterogeneous effects in that population of 4 million, right? And I feel like where we need to get to is for you, Sarah, very specifically, based on your spending patterns, based on your location, based on the things that you've been doing, here is your financial plan. And here's how we help you stay on top of that. And here's, the way we keep you motivated and excited in the moments where maybe you're not sticking to that plan, right? So I think hyper-personalization is going to be really big, particularly as we're starting to move to a world where algorithms, Google can predict, here's what your calendar looks like today, and, this is the traffic on your way to work if you are going to work, etc. Personalization is also going to be big. So I would say simplicity, transparency, personalization as principles are probably what's going to rule the financial world of the future. But in terms of the actual products, in terms of whether it's going to be crypto or something totally different, it's hard to predict. But with those things, it's kind of like what they say about when you're in a gold rush, you should invest in the people who are selling the pans and not the actual gold people who are panning for gold, right? So I think kind of the basics, the fundamentals will always be there. People need credit. People need a way to save. People need a way to stay in control of their spending. How and what products we use to do that up for grabs.
Yeah, that's great. I love that saying. You've thrown in some great sayings, I have to say. Etinosa, some like small pearls of wisdom that I'm gonna take with me for sure. I mean, I definitely think this idea of more personalization, more tailoring of these financial plans sounds like a super interesting idea. I mean, can you think, are there like when I try and think of how I would answer the question, what do I want my money to be doing for me now in 5 years, in 10 years? Are there sort of like broad categorizations of, people who say, I want my money to be growing, or I want my money to be creating a safety net, or I want my money to, work for me and my goals? Is that a useful way of thinking about the fact that different people at different stages of their life are going to be wanting their money to work differently for them, in a sense?
Yeah, I think so. Like it's almost like it's similar to what you're saying, right? Like you're gonna need a safety net for things that happen that you don't plan for in the present. You're gonna need a way to invest your money or plant your money so that it can grow, so you're like covered in the future. You're gonna need something that helps you stay on track with your day-to-day spending. I think like the framework for this is like the everyday rainy day one day. So what am I doing today? Do I have a safety net for when things go bad? And am I covering myself from when I'm older and my life looks, drastically different? And And it's and right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you have to be doing everything all the time at the same time. You don't get to be like, oh, I'm 25, so I'm not going to save for retirement. I'll just save when I'm 40. You have to do everything at the same time, and that's part of what the complexity. That's part of where the complexity kind of comes into with like money management. It's not just like, oh, save right now, you'll be fine. It's save and invest and pay down your debt and do all of these 6 other things all at the same time. It's hard.
It's tough, but I'm glad we've got people like you, Etinosa, helping us out with some behavioural science, because you're right. It's the reason why there's so much work, academic work in the area, like practical work, actually applying behavioural insights, because it's a lot to think about for one person, and we're not always going to make the best choices.
Yep.
So, yeah, thank you for your service, I guess.
All the veterans are deleting your episode right now.
Oh God. So, I know especially because we've just mentioned personalization. So this question is maybe rather counterintuitive, but is there any general advice when it comes to handling your personal finances where you're just like, if people take anything away from this episode, just take that one thing away if people have god-awful memory capacity?
Yeah. So I think like from a very general, very, very high level perspective, if you want to do something, you need to make it as easy as possible for yourself to do. And don't expect that like you're always going to make the right decision in the heat of the moment. So if you want to save money, consider, for example, like getting people to automate their savings up top, right? As soon as you get paid, save a portion of it and you save your money. Done. Now you can move forward and spend and do whatever you want with what's left. So I think as a principle, the fastest and the best way to get anything done is to make it as easy as possible for yourself to do it. And don't trust that your future self is going to be able to make all of the right decisions. Take that decision away from your future self, get it done up front, and you should be fine.
And we should be fine. Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. And if the listener wants to, hear more from you, or just, keep an eye on what you're doing and your progress, is there anything that you would like to plug, any sort of social media, or wherever would you like to direct them to go after this episode?
Yeah, I have a website, Etinosa.com, and I am on Instagram at the Etinosa, I'm gonna say. Yeah.
I like
so, it. Through the Etinosa, the one and only, the Etinosa. Yeah, so through those two outlets, they can find me and shoot me an email if they have any questions.
All right, cool. In that case, thank you so much for your time and your advice. And I hope you're right with regards to, transparency and simplicity, because honestly, I can't wait.
Well, thank you guys for having me. It's good conversation.
Well, it's always nice to just sit down and have a chat with a friend of mine. Now also a friend of Sarah's. This is how that works. That's now a general friend of the show.
Yeah, in the times of a pandemic, when you can't go out and meet people in person, just start a podcast and get to know your friends' friends. That's perfect. Yeah.
That is exactly how it works. Network effects at its finest. But obviously, as I said in the introduction, or, if you know me, I am a massive dork for personal finance, so I was really happy with this episode. I think Etinosa has highlighted some really interesting developments that are going on in the field, mentioned some stuff going on in both Australia, the States, and Europe, some really cool initiatives, so I can add those to my list to look into. So I'm happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just found it really cool to speak to someone who is, at our level in terms of age and experience, but just, has chosen the slightly different path to go into being a practitioner rather than sticking to do the PhD. And it was just really interesting to see how, Etinosa's put expectations of behavioral science and the sort of your perception that gets built up through doing a master's and through reading all of these pop science books that a lot of us get the interest from, how that then matches up to moving into the practitioning world at this stage is always super interesting to me. I love talking about it, so it was good.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting to talk about expectations. I find this so because we also had a conversation a long time ago by this stage with Matej Susha, so the CEO of MindWorks, and just his entire idea of, what you learn in a master's is so incredibly theoretical and so non-applied, really, that it's very, very difficult through education to get a real feeling for what's going on the practitioning side. I mean, so far, I think he's right. Obviously we're both in PhD, so most of our understanding is theoretical and experimental in an academic setting. But it's a very interesting point that I think warrants further discussion. At least I think it's interesting.
I think so too, especially because we're sort of living it right now, and trying maybe bridging that gap, moving our careers slightly away from a purely university-based academic career. We'll be able to feedback whether or not all of this stuff in theory we're talking about matches to our experience. So if we get jobs.
If we ever end up getting hired somewhere by anyone. Hopefully.
We can dream.
We can dream, yeah, no. I mean, dream big or go home. Or in this case, stay home because we're, it is what it is. Anyway, moving on from that. Just in general, Etinosa, thanks for making the time. It was good to see you, girl. And that is essentially it for this episode. Everything, as always, will be linked down below. Many of the initiatives that Etinosa spoke about, so for example, the apps, the personal finance apps, or some of the developments in the field, as always, will also be linked below. So don't worry, we'll make it nice and easy for you to get the right resources. As always, we hope you thought this was an interesting, educational, thought-provoking, or at least entertaining episode. We hope you have a great week, and we hope to see you again next week. Bye.